July 1st, 1097. Dawn, the plain outside Durham. 6,000 Seljuk horsemen sweep down from the hills. Arrows already in the air. The camp hasn't even sounded the alarm. 10,000 crusaders, soldiers, pilgrims, priests, women face the most lethal cavalry force in the world. Their main army is a full day's march away. There is no rescue coming. For 7 hours in chain mail under a July sun, the Norman and English knights of the First Crusade will face something no Western army has survived before. Constantinople itself was within striking distance of Turkish cavalry. Urban's call generated a response that astonished everyone, including Urban himself. Across France, Normandy, the German states, England, and Norman Italy, men of every rank took the cross. Some went from genuine religious conviction. Some went because a younger son had no inheritance waiting at home. Some went because debt or disgrace made staying worse than marching into the unknown. By 1096, the largest army Western Europe had assembled in living memory was moving east. Not one organized force, but several columns bound by the same destination and precious little else. The military corps was formidable. Bohemond of Taranto was among the finest soldiers in Europe. A Norman lord from southern Italy who had spent his career fighting Xantines and understood combined arms warfare at a level most of his peers did not. His nephew Tancred was aggressive and brilliant, and alongside them marched Robert Curthose, Duke of Normandy, eldest surviving son of William the Conqueror. Robert's presence meant something specific. He had mortgaged his entire duchy to his brother William Rufus, King of England, for 10,000 marks of silver to fund this expedition. He had bet everything on the crusade. With him came the knights of Normandy and England, the professional military class that had conquered England 30 years earlier at Hastings. Men trained in the same hard school of disciplined heavy cavalry that had shattered Harold's army on that October afternoon in 1066. These were not enthusiastic volunteers. These were professionals. Among Robert's companions were figures whose names fill the chronicles. Odo of Bayeux, half-brother of the Conqueror, pagan Peveril, who would return from the crusade to found one of England's baronial families, and Fulcher of Chartres, a priest who recorded everything he witnessed with the careful eye of a man who understood he was watching history happen. With a crusade departed Nika. For Bohemond's knights, this was a nightmare with no obvious answer. Every time they spurred their destriers forward to countercharge, the Turkish ponies simply turned and accelerated away. Lighter, faster, designed for exactly this kind of warfare. Any knight who broke from the formation to pursue was instantly surrounded by men who could shoot backwards in the saddle and cut down. The momentum of a Norman cavalry charge, the most feared military instrument in Western Europe, was completely useless against an enemy who refused to stand still and receive it. Within an hour, the camp was in chaos. Arrows fell everywhere. Horses screamed. The unarmed pilgrims and servants who had no armor had nowhere to go. Casualties among the civilians were severe from the opening minutes. Kiliarklen was grinding the column down, breaking its spirit, killing its horses, waiting for the formation to fragment so his cavalry could ride through it. Then Bohemond gave the order that saved the crusade. He told every knight to dismount. In the culture of Norman warfare, this was a decision that cut against every instinct these men had. For a knight of the 11th century, fighting on foot was what happened when your horse was dead beneath you. Not a choice, not something you did voluntarily. The mounted knight was the prestige weapon of medieval warfare. To put them in a shield wall like Anglo-Saxon infantry was to reverse everything they understood about how battles were won. But Bohemond looked at what was happening around him and understood it with cold clarity. Mounted combat requires an enemy willing to be hit. The Turks were not willing. The knights climbed down from their saddles and formed a tight defensive perimeter around the camp. Shields overlapping, spears forward, their full-length chain mail hulls, their great kite shields, their iron helms. Equipment designed for a different kind of fighting became exactly the right tools for what they were now doing. The Turks' arrows hammered into the shields and spent themselves against the mail. Some found gaps at throats and wrists and thighs, and men fell, but the line held. And the Turks, watching their arrows achieve almost nothing against these formations, gave these men a name that the chronicles preserved across 7 centuries. Demir Adamla İromen. Robert Curthose and his Norman and English contingent held the right of the line. Fulcher of Chartres, who was there and saw it, records what happened when the line came closest to breaking. A concentrated Turkish push drove hard into the right flank, and men began to waver. Robert removed his helmet, exposing his face, making himself a visible target, making absolutely certain his men could see him, and shouted. The chronicles say the shout stopped the wavering. It is the kind of moment that no tactical manual can produce, the willingness of a commander to publicly accept the same risk as the men he is leading. The right flank closed, the push was absorbed. Throughout all of this, the women of the column did something that Fulcher of Chartres records with the matter-of-factness of a man who was there and understood what he was watching. On June 26, 1097, taking the former Seljuk capital after a siege, the army made a decision that nearly proved catastrophic. The column was too large to march as a single unit across the dry Anatolian plateau. Feeding and watering such a force required splitting into 2 groups. An advanced column under Bamund, including Robert Curthose and the Norman and English contingents, and a main body a full day's march behind under Godfrey of Boulogne and Raymond of 2 Kilogarlon, had been watching his intelligence network, had tracked the Crusaders since Nika, which he had lost to them humiliatingly after being caught away from the city, dealing with a rival. He had spent the weeks since building an alliance with the Danishman Turks, old enemies, because he understood that what was coming could not be stopped by any single Seljuk force alone, and he had chosen his ground with care. The valley near Dorium, modern Eskişehir, was perfect, open enough for cavalry to work, ringed by hills for concealment, bisected by the river Timbris, which would trap the Crusaders against the water if the opening assault drove them back. Bowman's column made camp on the north bank of the river on the evening of June 30th. The ground looked defensible. The water was close. The surrounding countryside seemed quiet. Women moved back and forth between the defensive formation and the river during the fighting, carrying water to the knights on the line. In chainmail armor under a Turkish July sun, water was not a comfort. It was as necessary as the shields themselves. Without it, the Iron Men would have collapsed from heat exhaustion before Kili Arlen needed to break them by force. The women of the First Crusade carrying buckets through an arrow-swept battlefield were part of why the line held for 7 hours. The hours accumulated. K. Arlen rotated his units with professional efficiency, keeping fresh bowmen cycling into range, while others rested and refilled their quivers. The marshy ground along the riverbank slowed any Turkish push toward the water. Soft ground that heavier horses couldn't cross at speed, but the Turks tightened the circle regardless, reducing the space the Crusaders held, increasing the density of fire, waiting for the formation to crack. Bohand had sent messengers from the first minutes of the attack, riding hard for the main column. 7 hours later, they had done their work. The first sign was a small group of knights, perhaps 50 men under Godfrey of Boulogne himself, who broke through the Turkish outer ring and reached the formation. Not enough to change the battle, but enough to confirm that the main army was coming. Then Raymond of Toulouse provincial troops hit the Turkish southern flank with a momentum of men who had been forced marching for hours and arrived furious. And then Bishop Adumar of Lioy did something that the chronicles still celebrate. Adumar was the Pope's personal representative on the crusade.